Boudica is a household name, a person who is considered as a British national heroine and a symbol of the struggle for justice and independence. This is the history of Boudica, Queen of the Iceni. Nothing with any certainty is known about Boudica's early life, and it is believed that she was born around 30 AD in south-east England. In 48 AD she married Prestutius, the head of the Iceni tribe, and the couple would go on to have 2 daughters. They lived in Norfolk and, during the life of Prestutius, were given semi-independence from the Roman occupiers. Prestutius was given the freedom to remain king of the Iceni, but under the dominion of Rome. Despite some advantages to Roman rule, the Iceni people suffered many indignities, such as slavery and high taxes. On Prestutius's death in 60 or 61 AD, he made his 2 daughters as well as the Roman Emperor Nero his heirs. The Romans ignored the will, and the kingdom was absorbed into the province of Britannia. Castus Decianus, procurator of Britain, was sent to secure the Iceni kingdom for Rome. The Boudican revolt against the Roman Empire is referred to in 4 works from classical antiquity, written by 3 Roman historians: the Agricola and the Annals by Tacitus, a mention of the uprising by Senatus in his Lives of the Caesars, and the longest account, a detailed description of the revolt contained within Cassius Dio's History of the Empire. The Romans' next actions were described by Tacitus, who detailed the pillaging of the countryside, the ransacking of the king's household, and the brutal treatment of Boudica and her daughters. According to Tacitus, Boudica was flogged and her daughters were raped. These abuses are not mentioned in Cassius Dio's account, who instead cites 3 different causes for the rebellion: the recalling of loans that were given to the Britons by Seneca, Castus Decianus' confiscation of money formerly loaned to the Britons by the Emperor Claudius, and Boudica's own entreaties. The loans were thought by the Iceni to have been repaid by gift exchange. The Roman writer Cassius Dio described Boudica as very tall, her eyes seemed to stab you, her voice was harsh and loud, her thick reddish-brown hair hung down below her waist. She always wore a great golden torque around her neck, and a flowing tartan cloak fastened with a brooch. The first target of the rebels was Calydunum, modern-day Colchester, a Roman colony for retired soldiers. A Roman temple had been erected there to Claudius, at great expense to the local population. Combined with brutal treatment of the Britons by the veterans, this had caused resentment towards the Romans. The Iceni and the Trinovantes comprised an army of 120,000 men. Cassius Dio claimed that Boudica called upon the British goddess of victory, Andraste, to aid her army. Once the revolt had begun, the only Roman troops available to provide assistance, aside from a few within the colony, were 200 auxiliaries located in London, who were not equipped to fight Boudica's army. Calydunum was captured by the rebels. Those inhabitants who survived the initial attack took refuge in the temple of Claudius for 2 days before they were killed. Quintus Paetillus Cyrillus, then commanding the 9th Legion Hispana, attempted to relieve Calydunum, but suffered an overwhelming defeat. At the time of the rebellion, Suetonius Paulinus was leading a campaign against the island of Mona, modern-day Anglesey off the coast of North Wales. On hearing the news of the Iceni uprising, he left the garrison on Mona and returned to deal with Boudica. He moved quickly with a force of men through hostile territory to Londinium, which he reached before the arrival of Boudica's army. But outnumbered, he decided to abandon the town to the rebels, who burned it down after torturing and killing everyone who remained. The rebels also sacked Virculanum, modern-day St Albans, though the extent of its destruction is unclear. Cassius Dio and Tacitus both report that around 80,000 people were said to have been killed by the rebels. According to Tacitus, the Britons had no interest in taking the Roman population as prisoners, only in slaughter by gibbet, fire or cross. Cassius Dio adds that the noblest women were impaled on spikes and had their breasts cut off and sewn to their mouths, to the accompaniment of sacrifices, banquets, and wanton behaviour in sacred places, particularly the groves. In his historical account, Cassius Dio wrote, "A terrible disaster occurred in Britain. 2 cities were sacked, 80,000 of the Romans and their allies perished, and the island was lost to Rome. Moreover, all this ruin was brought upon the Romans by a woman, a fact which in itself caused them the greatest shame. But the person who was chiefly instrumental in rousing the natives and persuading them to fight the Romans, the person who was thought worthy to be their leader and whom directed the conduct of the entire war, was Boudica, a Briton woman of the royal family and possessed of greater intelligence than often belongs to women." Suetonius Paulinus regrouped his forces and amassed an army of almost 10,000 men at an unidentified location and took a stand in a narrow location somewhere alongside the Watling Street Road, with a thick wood to his flanks and behind. The Roman army was heavily outnumbered. According to Dio, the rebels numbered 230,000 and were so confident of victory that they lined their wagons across the battlefield so that the warriors' families could watch. The Romans had superior tactics, training, discipline and weapons. The Britons' attack was stopped with a hail of Roman javelins, and then the Romans advanced in a series of wedge-shaped formations, stabbing the Britons with their short swords and driving them back. As the Britons broke and began to flee, the Roman cavalry was deployed to finish the job. At first, the legionaries stood motionless, keeping to the defile as a natural protection. Then, when the closer advance of the enemy had enabled them to exhaust their missiles with a certitude of aim, they dashed forward in a wedge-like formation. The auxiliaries charged in the same style, and the cavalry with lances extended broke away through any party of resolute men whom they encountered. The remainder took to flight, although escape was difficult, as the cordon of wagons had blocked the outlets. The troops gave no quarter, even to the women. The baggage animals themselves had been speared and added to the pile of bodies. The glory won in the course of the day was remarkable, and equal to that of our older victories, for, by some accounts, little less than 80,000 Britons fell at the cost of some 400 Romans killed, and a not much greater number of wounded. At the end of the battle, only 400 Romans had fallen, but up to 200,000 Britons had been slaughtered. Boudica is said by Tacitus to have poisoned herself, although in the Agricola, which was written almost 20 years before the Annals, mention nothing of suicide and attributes the end of the revolt to complacency. Cassius Dio, however, says Boudica fell ill and died and was given a lavish burial. The historian Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus writes that the crisis of the rebellion had almost persuaded Nero to abandon Britain, but with the revolt brought to a decisive end, the occupation of Britain continued for hundreds of more years.